Okay, very good. So what you see is where we operate the ROV from. You see the list of co-authors there, and Tim Sullivan on the right, and he uses his fishing boat to help us out. He's got a really great trolling motor that has an anchor lock, so in a pretty stiff wind, we can stay in one spot and explore the bottom with the ROV. And then you see our chief ROV pilot, Ken Gordon, sitting down in the boat. So well, with that, we'll advance to the next slide. And what I'm going to have to do here, I think, is look at my slides in PowerPoint, since I still don't see any of the slides, but that's okay. We're going to make this work. Okay. So if just for background, exploration of Lake Chelan has been a long-standing goal for Lake Chelan Research Institute. We started the institute in 2017 because we realized that there had been 0 water quality samples taken in Lake Chelan for a 9-year period. So that got us going. But the data that Bo showed from the USGS bathymetry, sub-bottom sediment profiles, and coring have enabled us to really hone our dive targets with our ROV. It's a long story how we ended up with the ROV. It's a blue ROV2. It's worked really well for us, and we're in the process of upgrading it so it'll work even better. But we've gotten the maximum return now from our science efforts because we can essentially do underwater geology at the mesoscale, the scale of outcrops. And we know because of the bathymetry where to find those outcrops. The scale that we look at the underwater outcrops at, it's about 15 times more detailed than the plus or minus 3-meter resolution of the bathymetric data. So the way I want to do this is just share our initial results with you today via a video of 2 of the dives and some still images of a 3rd dive. So this, if you go to the next slide, it should say ROV dive locations. And it shows that on the south shore of the southern basin of the lake, this is the Wapato Basin, the foot of Bear Mountain is our first dive. We did that one because it was relatively shallow, 48 meters, and there were a couple of landslide scarps, and we had a chance to look at that. And then we went to a more prominent landslide scarp, and then a steep part of the bottom on the edge of what's called Willow Point, where it could either have been bedrock or possibly glacial till. And we wanted to look at the sub-bottom sediment profiles and figure out which it was with the particular signature that we were seeing there. So the next slide is the video. And if you could play that and tell me when you actually start it.
Okay, he's trying to get to it now.
Okay.
And it's starting now. Well, hold on.
Okay, it takes a while to get rolling. So that's Ben Brownfield. He's a high school student, senior at Chelan High School. He wants to go into engineering. We're trying to convince him that discovery is not going to be part of his engineering career in the same way it would be in geology, environmental science, etc. But it's maybe a hard sell. We do need engineers, but that shows you a little better look at the ROV. And what should be coming up in the video, if it's assuming it's running, is that, and this is the hard part.
It's currently in the water right now.
Okay, so we're going down we're descending below the boat. And what we do is we put a line down and essentially, I'm going to speed up. So we're going down a line, and let me know when it hits the anchor, and then I'll know the right spot. I'll be keyed up with you
At
guys.
the anchor right now.
Okay, so we go down to an anchor. We have a fixed point on the bottom. You can see that's a little bit rough, that the anchor is pulling up and down. And you can also see that, the bottom of a lake like Lake Chelan, potentially boring, right? You see flat sediments at the lake, but we know that there is a scarp here from the data. And as we go along, you can see that we also see mysis shrimp. They were introduced to the lake to support a lake trout population for sport fishing back in the 70s. Most Western US lakes, they're trying to keep the mysis shrimp out, but not Lake Chelan. So we've actually crossed over the scarp now and are coming up on the scarp. And you can see that it looks a little bit degraded, and you can see that there's a trench on the right of the scarp. We think represents a rotational block. And you can also see that there are these holes in the scarp. So the best explanation we have so far of the holes is that they're actually made by Burbot. The sediment is extremely soft, and that the Burbot make these holes for spawning and for protecting their young. And you can see now that the scarp you can see its rounded shape. And so the question is, can you use the morphology of the scarp as a means of dating its age? And so we'll just go along this, and eventually, and again, I'm not quite sure where you guys are in the video, but we're going to have a close-up look at some of the holes here, and then
showing a map right now.
Okay, so we've gone to the next site. And you can see that this is a more prominent scarp. It's probably 2 or 3 times the height of the one we just looked at, and it's much deeper, 88 meters. Part of our upgrade is to allow us to go deep. You can see the anchor, and again, we're going along the bottom. And then this time we're going to stop at the top of the scarp and kind of look over the edge. And then again, we'll approach the scarp from the other side, the downhill side, if you will. And what you'll see is that we again have this kind of a trench or rotational block. It's not everywhere along the scarp, but it's something we want to look at to figure out the mechanism of the scarp formation and just how the sediment moves away from the scarp downslope. You can see that this scarp is much steeper, much sharper edge, not so rounded. Possibly it's a bit younger. And you can see that there are some interesting stratigraphy that we see in this scarp as we're going along it. Yeah, we're looking at the other ones, the trench here, and also a really big hole, again, presumably made by this native fish in the lake, the burbot. And it'd be good if we had some collaborators, maybe Bob Vedas, you'd be interested in helping us try to understand the life cycle and the behavior of the burbot relative to these holes. There are some other ways that the holes might form. So there's a nice stick here looking at, and then you can see that we are looking at some white layers. Again, ash, as Bo pointed out, those have not yet been determined where they're from, but we can trace these. These are a little bit harder. This sediment's really soft except for the ash layers, but we'll expect to be able to sample that as well at some point. So we're following an ash layer along here, and looking over the edge, you can see that this is a much steeper scarp at this point, at least, than some of the other places. And again, you can see this brown layer that we're coming along. And when we get to the end of the video, we'll give a still of this particular area and some of the units that we want to sample to be able to tie in with cores and see how that compares to the core samples as well. Okay, so let me know when we actually begin to see one of the burbot, so I know where we're keyed into. You can actually see a bit of a fault in the brown layer, so some features that you would normally see in an outcrop and a big burbot hole as well.
Yeah, we're seeing a fish now. I think
Okay,
that's what we're talking about. Yeah, and
so
if you could wrap it up here soon, we have
Yep.
a couple minutes.
So
for
this is the burbot. We can actually stop the video here just shortly. we were told that this would never happen, that these things would leave the light, and turns out not to be the case. So you can stop the video and go to the next slide, which is the units that I talked about earlier, where we plan to go back to this location and stop and sample as well. So next slide. So the last thing I want to do just very quickly is look at another profile. You saw one of the profiles from Bo. This is a little closer to shore. And the next slide shows that sub-bottom sediment profile, and you can see the dive location. And so you see the structure, the sedimentary structure that Bo showed in either side of these edge of the rocky location, presumably. And so we're able to actually go to that dive location, look at that material, and figure out whether it's till or bedrock. So the next slide shows that image of what's clearly crystalline bedrock. So every once in a while you get a gift, and this gift here is the sunglasses for scale, if you can see in that. We recovered the guy's hat, which was not worth recovering. We should have picked up the sunglasses. But next slide shows a close-up below the sunglasses, and very clearly we're looking at what would be called the Chelan complex crystalline basement. So next slide, the last slide. So we are embarking on an ROV upgrade. We can save the details of that for discussion. We want to future dives prioritize characterizing these and sampling these landslide scarps. Clearly, it's where we can get at some of the geology of the sediments in the lake. And we're going to update our science objectives. We have a long list of things we can do, but one of the things we want to do is on those steep underwater bedrock walls in the Lucerne Basin, detect underwater groundwater seeps into the lake. And while we think that's a very small flux, it hasn't been quantified, and we think it could have an outsized impact on water quality. So last point, we're interested in collaborating with people who would like to help us meet those science objectives, whether citizen scientists or folks with that do this for a living. So we're open. And with that, I'll take questions.
We have time for about one question. So is there any questions? I see a comment from Robert, studying Burbot in Western Canada. Any other questions? One quick question. Right. If there is not a question, we're going to move on. Thank you, Phil, for your talk, and thanks for dealing with the technical issue there, not being able to see your slides.